The Grand Council chamber floated in the darkness of space, a massive station called Sanctuary 7 that marked the border between two great powers. Inside its largest hall, representatives from dozens of worlds had gathered to witness history. Today, humans and the Krell would sign a peace treaty, ending 5 years of brutal war that had cost millions of lives on both sides. Admiral Jonathan Hayes stood at the human delegation table, his dress uniform crisp and perfect. At 62 years old, his hair had gone completely gray during the war. Deep lines marked his face, each one telling a story of difficult decisions and sleepless nights. His blue eyes scanned the room with the careful attention of a man who had spent decades reading threats and opportunities. Today, those eyes showed nothing but calm professionalism. Beside him stood Dr. Lisa Morgan, the chief xenobiologist who had worked tirelessly to understand Krell culture. She was younger, only 38, with bright eyes that still held optimism despite the war. Her hands trembled slightly with excitement as she reviewed her notes. This was the moment she had dreamed of since the fighting began. Real peace, lasting cooperation between species. She had written 17 papers on how this day would reshape the galaxy. Captain Jake Morrison stood 3 steps behind them, wearing his combat uniform instead of dress clothes. He had refused to change, claiming someone needed to stay ready. His left arm bore scars from plasma burns, and his right eye had been replaced with a cybernetic implant after the Battle of New Terra. Unlike Dr. Morgan, he did not believe in this peace. His jaw stayed tight as he watched the Krell delegation across the room. The Krell were impossible to ignore. Commander Zarthok towered over everyone at 8 feet tall, his reptilian body covered in crystalline armor plates that caught the light. His 4 eyes moved independently, watching different parts of the room at once. Behind him stood a dozen Krell warriors, each one a veteran of the war. They wore ceremonial armor, but everyone knew they were armed beneath it. Ambassador Vixnall was smaller than the warriors, standing only 6 feet tall. His scales were lighter in color, almost silver, and his voice came out smooth and pleasant through the translation device. He had spent the past 6 months negotiating this treaty, always patient, always reasonable. He smiled now, showing rows of sharp teeth that he claimed was a gesture of friendship. The ceremony began with speeches. Representatives from neutral species praised both sides for their wisdom and courage. They spoke of a new era, of cooperation replacing conflict. Dr. Morgan listened with tears in her eyes. Captain Morrison listened with his hand near his sidearm. Admiral Hayes listened with no expression at all. When it came time to sign, Ambassador Vixnall approached the central table first. The treaty document sat on a platform that projected its text in 100 languages simultaneously. Cameras from across the galaxy broadcast every moment. The ambassador picked up the signing stylus with his 3-fingered hand and placed his mark on the document. He stepped back and spread his arms wide in what the translator called a gesture of openness. Admiral Hayes walked to the table with measured steps. His military boots made no sound on the polished floor. He read through the document one final time, even though he had memorized every word weeks ago. The treaty promised demilitarization of border zones. It promised trade routes and cultural exchanges. It promised a future where human children and Krell young could grow up never knowing war. He signed his name with a steady hand. The crowd erupted in applause. Dr. Morgan openly wept with joy. Even some of the military officers allowed themselves to smile. Only Captain Morrison remained stone-faced, his eyes never leaving the Krell warriors. The celebration afterward filled the station's main plaza. Diplomats mingled with military officers. Scientists exchanged ideas with their counterparts from other species. Someone had brought music, and the sound echoed through the corridors. Dr. Morgan found herself in conversation with Ambassador Vixnall, discussing plans for the first joint research station. The ambassador was charming and well-informed. She liked him immediately. Captain Morrison cornered Admiral Hayes in a quiet hallway away from the crowds. His voice came out harsh and low. "Why did you sign that?" he demanded. "You know what they are. You know what they did to our people. 5 years ago, they glassed 3 colonies without warning. Now we are supposed to trust them." Hayes regarded him calmly. "Captain, we are at peace now. The war is over. We must move forward." Morrison's face flushed red. "With respect, sir, that is garbage. I saw how they looked at us in there. I saw Commander Zarthok. That was not the look of someone who wants peace. That was the look of a predator watching prey. Hayes placed a hand on the captain's shoulder. I need you to trust me, Jake. Trust the process. Can you do that? Morrison stared at him for a long moment. Something in the Admiral's eyes made him pause. There was a depth there, a knowing that went beyond the public face Hayes showed the world. Finally, Morrison nodded. Yes, sir. I trust you, but I do not trust them. Good, Hayes said. Keep not trusting them. I need officers who stay alert. Now get back to the party and try to look happy. That is an order. Hours later, Dr. Morgan was still reviewing the treaty text in her quarters. Something bothered her about the translation. The Krell version used phrases that did not quite match the human version. Small differences, probably just cultural nuances in how concepts were expressed. She made notes to discuss it with the linguistics team tomorrow. Surely it was nothing important. The treaty had been reviewed by hundreds of experts. Across the station, the celebrations continued into the night. Humans and Krell drank together, though they required different types of alcohol. They shared stories through translators. They laughed at jokes that did not always make sense across species. It felt like the beginning of something new and wonderful. Admiral Hayes returned to his personal quarters long after midnight. He waited until the door sealed behind him before allowing his careful mask to slip. His shoulders sagged slightly and he poured himself a drink with shaking hands. He walked to his desk and pulled up a file on his private terminal, one that required 3 layers of security clearance to access. Project Watchdog. The file was labeled. He scrolled through pages of technical specifications, deployment schedules, and strategic assessments. Everything was proceeding on schedule. The Krell thought they were clever. They thought humans were naive enough to believe in peace. They had no idea what was really happening. Hayes closed the file and finished his drink. He thought about Dr. Morgan's genuine tears of joy. He thought about Captain Morrison's barely controlled anger. He thought about all the good people who believed the peace was real, who would sleep tonight thinking the war was finally over. They needed to believe. Their belief made everything else possible. He opened a communication channel, heavily encrypted and routed through 6 different relay points. The face that appeared on his screen was that of General Patricia York, head of human intelligence. She was the only other person in this sector who knew the complete truth. It is done, Hayes said simply. York nodded. The Krell bought it completely. Their intelligence reports show they believe we are already beginning demilitarization. They think we are fools, let them think it, Hayes replied. How long do we have? Our analysts predict they will wait at least 18 months before they strike. They will want to be certain we are defenseless. That gives us time to complete the preparations. Hayes was quiet for a moment. You know, Patricia, sometimes I wonder if we are the bad ones here. All this deception, all these lies to our own people. York's expression hardened. We are protecting our people. The Krell made their choice when they planned to use this treaty as a weapon. We did not start this game. We are just better at playing it. Hayes nodded slowly. You are right. Get some sleep, General. Tomorrow we begin Phase 2. He closed the channel and sat in darkness, listening to the sounds of celebration still echoing through the station. Somewhere out there, Dr. Morgan was probably still working on her linguistics notes. Captain Morrison was probably still glaring at any Krell he saw. Neither of them knew the truth. Neither of them could know, not yet. The peace treaty was a lie, but it was a lie humanity needed to tell, needed to believe in publicly while the real work happened in shadows. The Krell had started this game 2 years ago, when human intelligence first intercepted their true plans. Now both sides played their parts, each thinking they were deceiving the other. Only one side would be right. Admiral Hayes intended to make sure it was humanity. 6 months had passed since the treaty signing, and the galaxy watched humanity with approval. Every week brought news of another defensive platform being deactivated, another weapons factory converting to civilian production, another border station reducing its military presence. The human commitment to peace seemed genuine and complete. Other species held humanity up as an example of wisdom and restraint. Lieutenant Sarah Blake sat in the observation room of Outpost Phoenix, a border station that straddled the line between human and Krell space. She was 29 years old and had been an intelligence analyst for 6 years. Her job was to monitor ship traffic and file routine reports. It was supposed to be boring work now that peace had arrived. But something about the patterns she was seeing bothered her. The Krell trade convoys came through on schedule, exactly as the treaty specified. They carried goods from their worlds to human markets. The manifests always checked out. The ships always responded properly to hails. Everything was correct. Too correct. Sarah pulled up the tracking data again and studied the routes. Every convoy took nearly identical paths. They all showed the same mass readings despite supposedly carrying different cargo. And they all moved with the precision of military formations, not the loose groupings typical of civilian traders. She mentioned it to her commanding officer, a tired major who had 3 more months until retirement. He barely glanced at her data. "Lieutenant, we are at peace now. Trade ships follow efficient routes. That is good business practice. You are seeing patterns that are not there because you spent too long watching for threats." She tried to argue, but he dismissed her. "File your routine reports and stop looking for problems where none exist." Sarah went back to her station feeling frustrated. Maybe the major was right. Maybe she had spent too long in military intelligence. Maybe peace really was just boring. But she kept copies of her data anyway, storing them in her personal files. Something told her she might need them later. 3,000 miles away on the same station, civilian engineer Danny Cross was having his own doubts. He worked in the technology exchange program, part of the treaty's provisions for sharing knowledge between species. Every day he worked alongside Krell engineers, teaching them about human defensive systems, power generation, and communications technology. In return, they were supposed to teach humans about Krell innovations, but Danny noticed that what humans shared was always substantial and detailed, while what the Krell shared was vague and superficial. They asked endless questions about shield generators, weapon targeting systems, and power distribution networks. Meanwhile, they offered information about improved food synthesis and minor efficiency gains in waste recycling. Nothing strategic, nothing military, nothing that would actually help humanity. When Danny pointed this out to his supervisor, the response was dismissive. Different species have different things to share. The Krell are more advanced in biological sciences. Be patient. Danny was not convinced, but he kept working. He had a wife and 2 kids back on Earth. He needed this job. Still, he started making notes about which systems the Krell were most interested in, just in case. Captain Jake Morrison was no longer on Sanctuary 7. He had been reassigned to border patrol duty, commanding a small frigate that made regular sweeps through the demilitarized zone. His crew thought it was punishment for his attitude during the peace ceremony. Morrison knew better. Admiral Hayes had personally approved the assignment. The admiral wanted someone he trusted keeping eyes on the border. 3 weeks into his assignment, Morrison encountered a Krell civilian vessel broadcasting a distress signal. Standard procedure required him to offer assistance. He brought his frigate alongside and hailed them. The Krell captain thanked him but insisted the problem was minor and they needed no help. Morrison could have left it there. Instead, he positioned his ship to perform a standard safety scan. For just a moment, the Krell ship's cargo bay doors cycled open to vent some gas from their supposed reactor leak. In that moment, Morrison's sensors got a clear reading of what was inside. Military-grade weapon systems, shield generators far too powerful for a civilian ship, what looked like missile launch tubes. The Krell captain realized his mistake and closed the doors immediately, then quickly jumped to hyperspace without another word. Morrison filed a detailed report and marked it priority. He expected orders to intercept more Krell vessels, to investigate the treaty violation. Instead, he received a brief message from Fleet Command acknowledging his report and ordering him to continue regular patrol. Nothing else, no investigation, no action. It made no sense, unless someone higher up already knew, unless this was part of something bigger. Morrison remembered Admiral Hayes telling him to trust the process. Maybe this was the process. He kept his mouth shut and continued his patrols, but now he watched every Krell ship with even greater attention. Dr. Lisa Morgan spent her days in a state of pure joy. She traveled between human and Krell worlds, setting up cultural exchange programs, teaching xenobiology to eager students, and writing papers about the new era of cooperation. The Krell she met were polite and interested, They asked good questions. They seemed genuinely curious about human culture. She presented her latest paper at a conference on Earth, speaking to a packed auditorium about how the peace dividend would benefit both species for generations. She talked about joint research, stations, shared colonies, even the possibility of Krell-human friendships that transcended species. The audience gave her a standing ovation. 3 universities offered her positions. Her work was being recognized as groundbreaking. In private moments, she sometimes thought about those translation discrepancies she had noticed in the treaty. She had brought them up with the linguistics team, who assured her they were just normal variations in how concepts were expressed between languages. She had accepted that explanation. After all, the treaty was working. Both sides were following its provisions. Results mattered more than perfect wording. What Dr. Morgan did not know was that her reports went to more than just academic journals. Every paper she wrote, every observation she made, every Krell response to her programs, all of it was being compiled and analyzed by military intelligence. Her genuine enthusiasm and the Krell responses to it provided valuable data about how well the deception was working on both sides. Lieutenant Blake finally completed her analysis of Krell ship movements. She had 6 months of data now, and the patterns were undeniable. The trade ships were not trading. They were mapping. Every route they took gave them detailed scans of human infrastructure. Every supposedly random course correction positioned them to observe military installations or important colonies. And the mass readings suggested they were carrying far more than commercial goods. She compiled everything into a comprehensive report. This time, she did not submit it through normal channels. She marked it for direct delivery to Fleet Intelligence and flagged it as urgent. 3 days later, she received a message. Her report had been received and was under review, then nothing else for a week. She started to think it had been ignored like before. Then Admiral Hayes himself arrived at Outpost Phoenix. It was supposed to be a routine inspection tour, but he specifically requested to meet with Lieutenant Blake in private. She entered the meeting room nervous and uncertain. Hayes sat at the table reviewing her report on a data pad. He looked up and studied her for a long moment. "This is excellent work, Lieutenant," he said. "Very thorough, very detailed. Tell me, do you believe the Krell are violating the treaty?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "I believe the evidence suggests they are preparing for something. Whether that violates the treaty depends on their intentions, sir." Hayes nodded. "Smart answer. What if I told you that we already know what they are preparing for? What if I told you that we have known since before the treaty was signed?" Sarah felt her world shift. "Then I would ask why we signed it, sir. Because sometimes the best defense is to let your enemy think they are winning," Hayes replied. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. "Everything you documented in your report is being tracked. Every Krell ship, every movement, every suspicious mass reading. We know exactly what they are doing because we let them do it. Your work helped confirm our intelligence estimates were correct." He turned back to face her. "I need to know if you can keep this information classified. What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room. Can you do that, Lieutenant?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said without hesitation. Hayes spent the next hour explaining Project Watchdog. He told her about the intelligence intercepts from before the treaty. He explained how humanity had known the Krell were planning to use peace as a weapon. He described the real preparations being made while the public dismantling of defenses provided cover. By the time he finished, Sarah understood why her reports had been taken seriously but generated no visible response. "You want me to keep feeding them information," she said. "Let them think their deception is working." "Exactly," Hayes confirmed. "And I want you to continue your analysis. The more we know about their movements and preparations, the better we can position our response. Consider yourself promoted to the Intelligence Division. You will report directly to General York from now on." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and fear. 18 months after the treaty signing, the galaxy had settled into what seemed like comfortable peace. Trade flourished. Cultural exchanges happened regularly. The war felt like ancient history to many people. But in the shadows, both humans and Krell were racing toward a confrontation that only one side fully understood. Deep beneath the surface of Mars, in a facility that did not exist on any official records, Dr. Alan Price worked on weapons that would reshape warfare. He was 53 years old, had 3 advanced degrees in physics, and had spent the last decade developing technologies that most people would consider impossible. His current project was the key to Project Watchdog. The quantum stealth platforms were his greatest achievement. Each one was the size of a small building, but completely invisible to conventional sensors. They used quantum entanglement to phase slightly out of normal space, not enough to move to another dimension, but enough that radar, LiDAR, and thermal scanning could not detect them. They drew power from zero-point energy, requiring no fuel, generating no heat signature, and they were armed with weapons powerful enough to destroy a battleship in seconds. Over the past 18 months, 300 of these platforms had been deployed throughout human space. They floated in the void, invisible and silent, positioned at every strategic point that intelligence predicted the Krell would target. Each platform was autonomous, able to make targeting decisions in microseconds. Together, they formed a defensive network that could respond to attack faster than any biological crew could manage. General Patricia York stood in the observation room above the main lab, watching Price run final tests on the newest platform. She was 61 years old and had been in intelligence for 4 decades. She had seen humanity at its best and worst. She had made decisions that cost lives to save more lives. This was the biggest gamble of her career, and everything needed to work perfectly. Admiral Hayes joined her at the window. "How many are deployed now?" he asked. 312, York replied. "We will have another 50 online within 2 weeks. The network will be complete and they are truly undetectable. We have had Krell ships pass within 100 meters of platforms without noticing. The quantum phase shift puts them just outside normal sensor range. Unless someone knows exactly what to look for and where to look, they are ghosts." Hayes nodded slowly. He looked tired. The weight of command and deception had aged him over the past months. "Do you ever wonder if we are wrong?" he asked quietly. "What if the Krell really do want peace? What if our intelligence was mistaken?" York pulled up a data display on her tablet and showed it to him. "These are the latest intercepts from 3 days ago. Krell High Command discussing final preparations for what they call the cleansing. They estimate they can destroy 70% of human military capability in the first strike, then subjugate the rest within 6 months. They are quite pleased with how well their deception has worked." Hayes read the translation carefully. His jaw tightened. "They plan to hit us on the anniversary then. 2 years to the day after the treaty signing. They think it is poetic. A symbolic gesture to demonstrate that peace was always an illusion. They want the galaxy to remember the date that the Krell proved themselves superior to humanity. Instead, it will be the date they learned not to underestimate us," Hayes said. He turned away from the window. 3 weeks. We have 3 weeks to finish everything. Can we do it? Yes, the platforms are ready. Our ships are positioned. The retrofit programs are complete. On paper, we look defenseless. In reality, we have never been stronger. What about the civilian population? They still believe the peace is real, York sighed. That is the hardest part. We cannot warn them without tipping off the Krell. The evacuation drills we have been running will help, but there will still be casualties when the attack begins. We are doing everything we can to minimize civilian presence in the target zones, but we cannot be obvious about it. Across the solar system, Captain Morrison had been brought fully into the inner circle. He now commanded a battle group that officially existed only on paper. His ships were retrofitted civilian vessels that looked harmless on scans, but carried weapon systems equal to any military cruiser. His crew had been carefully selected, all veterans who could be trusted with the truth. Morrison stood on his bridge reviewing deployment orders. His battle group would position itself along the most likely Krell approach vector, disguised as a merchant convoy. When the attack came, they would be the first line of response. The weight of that responsibility sat heavy on his shoulders, but he welcomed it. After months of watching and waiting, he would finally get to fight back. His executive officer, Commander Linda Shaw, approached with the latest intelligence brief. "The Krell fleet is assembling at their forward staging bases," she reported. "Our estimates show at least 2,000 warships preparing for deployment. That is 3 times what they are allowed under the treaty." Morrison smiled grimly. "Good. The more ships they commit, the more we can destroy in the opening engagement. Is everyone in position?" "Yes, sir. All battle groups are ready." The quantum platforms are online. The civilian population is as safe as we can make them without giving away the plan. We are as ready as we will ever be. Lieutenant Sarah Blake worked from a secure facility on Earth now, coordinating intelligence from across human space. She had been promoted twice in 18 months and now held a position usually reserved for officers 10 years older. Every day she processed reports from hundreds of sources, building a complete picture of Krell preparations. The data was overwhelming. Krell troop movements, fleet deployments, supply chain logistics, communications intercepts. Each piece added to the mosaic showing the massive attack being prepared. She had long since stopped doubting the intelligence. The evidence was undeniable. The Krell were coming, and they expected an easy victory. Her assistant, a young analyst named Peter Grant, brought her the latest update. The Krell are broadcasting increased trade convoy schedules for the week after the anniversary, he said. They are already planning the occupation. They think they will control human space by then. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. They are going to be very surprised. Make sure this data gets to Admiral Hayes and General York. They will want to see how confident the Krell are. Meanwhile, Dr. Lisa Morgan continued her work, completely unaware of what was coming. She was currently aboard a Krell station, participating in a biological research project. The Krell scientists she worked with were polite and professional. They discussed genetic markers and protein synthesis. They shared meals and talked about their families. She had grown to genuinely like them. She recorded a message to send back to Earth, talking excitedly about the progress being made. This is proof that our species can work together, she said into the camera. The peace is not just holding, it is flourishing. I truly believe that 100 years from now, historians will look back at this time as the moment when everything changed for the better. Her message was intercepted and routed to General York before being released to the public. York watched it with a mixture of sadness and resolve. Dr. Morgan's genuine enthusiasm was part of what made the plan work. The Krell saw her and believed that humanity was truly naive, truly committed to peace. They did not realize that her innocence was being used as a weapon just as surely as the quantum platforms. York sent a message to the security team assigned to protect Morgan. When the attack begins, get her out immediately. I do not care if you have to sedate her and carry her. She gets to safety. We owe her that much. With 2 weeks remaining, Admiral Hayes called a final strategy meeting. Every senior officer who knew the truth attended, either in person or through secure channels. He stood before them, his uniform perfect, his expression calm and confident. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, we are about to face the greatest test in human history, not because the enemy is so strong, but because we have had to deceive everyone, including our own people, to reach this point. We have asked you to carry an impossible burden, to lie to friends and family, to watch as our species appears to grow weak and vulnerable, to trust that we knew what we were doing. He paused, looking around the room at faces he had come to know well over the past months. In 2 weeks, that burden ends. In 2 weeks, the Krell will attack. They will come with overwhelming force, expecting an easy victory. Instead, they will find an enemy that was never as weak as it appeared. They will learn that humanity's greatest weapon is not our technology or our courage. It is our ability to plan, to prepare, and to sacrifice pride for survival. When this is over, when the truth comes out, some people will call us liars and manipulators. They will be angry that we deceived them. They will question whether the ends justified the means. That is their right. But we will know that we did what was necessary to protect our species. We will know that every life saved was worth the burden we carried. He straightened, his voice growing stronger. 2 weeks from now, we will show the galaxy what humanity is truly capable of, not through aggression or cruelty, but through strategic brilliance and patient preparation. The Krell think they are clever. They think they have fooled us. They have no idea that we have been 3 steps ahead since the day the treaty was signed. Let us make sure they learn that lesson. The 2-year anniversary celebration aboard Sanctuary 7 was the grandest gathering the station had ever hosted. Representatives from 43 different species filled the halls, celebrating what many called the most successful peace treaty in galactic history. Decorations hung everywhere, displaying both human and Krell symbols of unity. Music played, a fusion of styles from both cultures. It felt like the dawn of a new age. Dr. Lisa Morgan stood at the podium addressing the assembled dignitaries. She wore her finest dress and spoke with passion about the triumph of cooperation over conflict. Her voice rang clear and strong throughout the chamber, carried by the station's audio system to watching billions across the galaxy. 2 years ago, we signed a treaty, she said, but we did more than put signatures on a document. We made a choice. We chose to believe that different species could coexist peacefully. We chose to believe that war did not have to be inevitable. We chose to trust each other, and that trust has been rewarded 1,000 times over. Today we celebrate not just a treaty, but a transformation in how we see ourselves and each other. The audience applauded. Many had tears in their eyes. Ambassador Vixenal waited to speak next, prepared to echo her sentiments about eternal friendship between species. Everything was perfect. Everything was going exactly as both the humans and Krell had planned, though for very different reasons. 12,000 miles away, in the empty void between stars, the Krell battle fleet prepared to strike. 2,000 warships hung in formation, their weapons charged, their crews ready. Commander Zarthok stood on the bridge of his flagship watching the countdown timer. In 3 minutes they would jump to hyperspace. In 5 minutes they would emerge at strategic points throughout human territory. In 6 minutes the war would be over. He thought about the naive humans celebrating on Sanctuary 7. They truly believed in peace. They had dismantled their defenses like fools. They had allowed Krell ships to map every important target. They had shared their technology willingly. Zarthok felt something close to contempt. A species so trusting did not deserve to survive. The timer reached 0. Jump initiated. The Krell fleet vanished from normal space in a brilliant flash of light, reappearing moments later exactly where they intended. Their navigation was perfect. Their timing was flawless. They emerged from hyperspace at 30 different locations simultaneously, positioned to strike at humanity's most vital colonies and installations. Zarthok broadcast his message to every human frequency. Humans, he announced, his voice dripping with satisfaction. Your peace was always an illusion. Your trust was your weakness. Today you learn the price of naivety. Surrender now and you will be allowed to serve the Krell Empire. Resist and you will be eliminated. You have 5 minutes to decide. He cut the transmission and gave the order. All ships, open fire. Energy beams lanced through space, striking at what the Krell believed were defenseless stations and colonies. Missiles launched by the hundreds. The Krell fleet moved with confidence, their tactics flawless, their execution perfect. They had studied human defenses for 2 years. They knew every weak point. This would be the easiest conquest in Krell history. For exactly 90 seconds, nothing happened. The Krell weapons fired unopposed. Their ships advanced on their targets. Victory seemed certain and immediate. Commander Zarthok smiled, his 4 eyes tracking multiple tactical displays at once. It was almost disappointing how easy this was. Then the universe turned inside out. Space itself seemed to ripple. 300 points of emptiness suddenly became solid, as the quantum stealth platforms dropped their phase shift and appeared in normal space. Each one was positioned perfectly with clear firing solutions on multiple Krell ships. The platforms had been there all along, invisible and waiting, right next to the Krell fleet. The platforms opened fire simultaneously. Weapons that made Krell military technology look primitive tore through shields and armor. Ships that had been advancing confidently suddenly found themselves crippled or destroyed. The Krell fleet reacted with impressive speed, but they were reacting to enemies they had not known existed, from positions they could not have predicted. Zarthok watched in disbelief as his tactical display lit up with red warnings. Impossible, he muttered. They had no defenses. We watched them dismantle everything. Where did these platforms come from? Then the human trade stations revealed their true nature. What had looked like civilian facilities dropped their disguises and deployed military-grade shields. Weapon arrays emerged from concealed compartments. The demilitarized zones that the Krell had flown through so confidently suddenly became kill zones filled with hidden defenses. Civilian ships that had been peacefully trading for 2 years suddenly moved with military precision. Their hulls split open to reveal weapons. Their engines, supposedly weak and inefficient, proved capable of combat maneuvers. Captain Morrison's merchant convoy transformed into a battle group, catching a Krell squadron in a devastating crossfire. Morrison stood on his bridge, finally allowing himself to smile. Target their command ships first, he ordered. Let us show them what a real ambush looks like. His crews performed flawlessly, 2 years of secret training paying off in perfect coordination. The Krell ships they engaged never had a chance. Across human space, the pattern repeated 30 times. Each Krell attack force found itself trapped in a carefully prepared counter-ambush. Every advantage they thought they had was an illusion. Every weakness they had planned to exploit was actually a strength in disguise. The hunters had become the hunted. Then Admiral Hayes's face appeared on every screen, every display, every communication channel in human and Krell space. His expression was calm but held steel underneath. His voice carried the weight of authority earned through decades of service. "Commander Zarthok, representatives of the Krell military," he began. "You are not the first to mistake patience for weakness. 2 years ago, our intelligence services intercepted your true plans. We learned that you never intended to honor the peace treaty. We discovered that you viewed the treaty as a weapon, a way to make us lower our defenses so you could strike more easily." He paused, letting that sink in. "You are also not the first to underestimate humanity. We signed your treaty knowing it was a lie. We dismantled our defenses knowing you were watching. We played the role of naive, trusting partners because it served our purposes. Every ship you thought was civilian was actually military. Every defense you thought we removed was actually redeployed and improved. Every trade convoy that passed through your space was gathering intelligence while you gathered yours." His voice grew harder. "You spent 2 years preparing for this attack. We spent 2 years preparing for you. The difference is that we knew exactly what you were planning, while you knew only what we wanted you to see. Your weapons are targeting decoys and hardened facilities. Your fleet is surrounded by defensive systems you did not know existed. Your victory was always an illusion." He leaned forward slightly. "I am going to give you one opportunity that you did not plan to give us. Surrender now. Power down your weapons and accept imprisonment. You will be treated according to the actual rules of war, not the ones you intended to apply to us. This offer expires in 60 seconds. After that, my forces will assume you have chosen death over capture." The transmission ended. Across the battlefield, Krell commanders faced an impossible decision. Zarthok looked at his displays showing ship after ship being disabled or destroyed. His own flagship was already damaged, shields failing under concentrated fire from platforms he could not effectively target. Pride demanded he fight to the end. Survival demanded he surrender. He chose pride. "All ships continue attack," he ordered. "We do not surrender to inferior species. We fight until victory or death." The battle lasted another 23 minutes. It was not really a battle, more like an execution. The quantum platforms coordinated with human ships in perfect synchronization. They disabled Krell vessels with precision, targeting weapons and engines while avoiding kill shots when possible. They were demonstrating something important. Not just that they could win, but that they could control exactly how they won. When Zarthok's flagship finally lost all power and began to drift, he sat in his command chair, staring at displays that no longer worked. Around him, his bridge crew looked equally stunned. They had been the pride of the Krell military. They had conquered 6 species in the past century. They had never imagined defeat, especially not by humans who seemed so weak and foolish. A human boarding party arrived within minutes. Captain Morrison led them personally, his combat armor bearing the scars of the earlier war. He walked onto the Krell bridge and looked at Zarthok with something that was not quite pity and not quite contempt. "Commander," Morrison said formally, "you are now prisoners of war. You will be treated according to established protocols. Your crew will not be harmed if they cooperate. Do you understand?" Zarthok's translator converted his response. "How?" was all he could manage. "How did you know? How did you hide all this?" Morrison allowed himself a small smile. "Because we are not the naive fools you thought we were. We are humans. We adapt, we plan, we prepare. And we never ever forget when someone tries to destroy us. Now get up. You have a lot of time to think about your mistakes." Back on Sanctuary 7, 3 months after the failed Krell invasion, the galaxy was still trying to understand what had happened. News broadcasts analyzed the conflict endlessly. Academic papers attempted to break down the strategic deception. Diplomatic channels hummed with nervous conversations. The comfortable assumptions that had governed interstellar relations for generations had been shattered in 23 minutes of combat. Humanity's reputation had transformed overnight. Species that had viewed humans as idealistic peacekeepers now saw them as dangerous tacticians capable of playing games within games. The revelation that humans had known about the Krell deception from the beginning sent shockwaves through every government. If humanity could maintain such a massive secret for 2 years, what else might they be hiding? Trust became a complicated commodity in the new galactic order. The Krell military leadership had been completely dismantled. Commander Zarthok and his senior officers faced war crimes tribunals. The evidence of their planned atrocities was overwhelming. They had intended not just to conquer humanity, but to make an example that would terrorize other species into submission. The trials were broadcast across the galaxy, ensuring everyone understood what had almost happened. But the Krell people themselves were another matter. Younger Krell, those who had opposed their government's aggressive policies, seized the moment to push for change. A new government formed, led by reform-minded leaders who genuinely sought peaceful coexistence. They approached humanity not with arrogance, but with humility born from defeat, and the realization that their old ways had nearly destroyed them. Ambassador Vixenal was among the reformers. He had been horrified to learn about his government's true intentions. His belief in the peace treaty had been genuine, even if his superiors had been lying. Now he worked with human diplomats to create something real, something that could actually last. He met with Admiral Hayes in a small conference room on Earth, far from cameras and public attention. "I did not know," Vixenal said, his translator rendering his words with obvious emotion. "I truly believed in the peace we were building. When I learned the truth about what my government planned, I felt shame that I had been used as a tool for deception." Hayes nodded slowly. "I know you did not know. Our intelligence was certain of that. Your genuine belief was part of why we trusted you to help build the new treaty. We need people on both sides who actually want peace, not just another strategic advantage." The new treaty they negotiated was nothing like the old one. This version included extensive verification protocols, joint monitoring stations, regular inspections, shared intelligence on military capabilities. Most importantly, it included mechanisms for addressing concerns before they could fester into conflict. Trust was important, but verification was mandatory. Dr. Lisa Morgan worked alongside Vixenal on the cultural aspects of the new treaty. The past 3 months had been difficult for her. She had struggled with feelings of betrayal and manipulation, but gradually she came to understand the impossible position Admiral Hayes had been in. Sometimes protecting people meant deceiving them. It was an ugly truth, but truth nonetheless. She met with Hayes one afternoon in his office. The Admiral looked older now, the weight of command having extracted its final price. He would be retiring in 2 months, his service complete. Morgan had wanted to talk to him before he left. "I understand why you did it now," she said. "I do not like it. I still feel used, but I understand that you were trying to save lives with the tools you had available. I am not sure I can forgive you, but I can accept what happened." Hayes looked at her with tired eyes. "I do not expect forgiveness, Lisa. I used good people as tools because the alternative was letting millions die. That is something I will have to live with. But I want you to know that your work was not wasted. The genuine connections you made, the research you conducted, the friendships you built, those were all real. They matter now more than ever as we try to build actual peace." Morgan nodded. "I am going to keep working on the cultural exchange programs, but this time I am going into it with my eyes open. Peace through strength and verification, not naive hope." "That is all we can ask," Hayes replied. Captain Jake Morrison found unexpected common ground with former Krell military officers. Once the old leadership was removed, many Krell soldiers proved to be professional warriors who understood and respected what humanity had accomplished. Morrison led joint patrols in former conflict zones, working alongside Krell crews who had once been enemies. One of his Krell counterparts was a young commander named Tokval, who had fought in the failed invasion. They stood together on the bridge of Morrison's ship, watching a joint training exercise. Tokval turned to Morrison with a question that had clearly been bothering him. "How did you maintain the deception for so long?" he asked. 2 years of pretending to be weak while preparing for war. How did your people not realize what was happening? Morrison considered the question. Most people saw what they expected to see. They wanted peace to be real, so they believed in it. The few who noticed something wrong were either brought into the secret, or their concerns were dismissed. It was not perfect, but it worked well enough. Tokval was quiet for a moment. "We underestimated you. We saw your optimism and mistook it for weakness. We did not understand that humans could be both hopeful and ruthlessly practical at the same time. That will not happen again. Good, Morrison said, because next time we would all prefer to avoid war entirely. That is what all this training is for. So we can trust each other enough that verification becomes routine rather than suspicious. Lieutenant Sarah Blake received another promotion and now oversaw the new Joint Verification Office. Her job was to monitor both human and Krell military activities, ensuring compliance with the treaty. It was delicate work, requiring her to be fair to both sides while remaining vigilant for violations. She took to it naturally, her analytical mind perfect for the task. She worked with a mixed team of human and Krell analysts. At first, the collaboration was awkward. Trust had to be rebuilt from nothing, but gradually professional respect developed. They were all doing the same job, trying to prevent another war through transparency and verification. Shared purpose created its own kind of bond. The galactic community watched these developments with cautious optimism. New standards for peace treaties emerged, incorporating lessons from the human-Krell situation. Other species began implementing verification protocols in their own agreements. The concept of trust but verify became a foundation of interstellar diplomacy. 6 months after the invasion, a joint educational facility opened on a neutral world. Human and Krell children would study together, learning each other's history and culture. The facility was symbolic, representing hope for a future where the next generation would not inherit the hatreds of the past. Danny Cross, the engineer who had noticed the imbalanced technology sharing, brought his family to the opening ceremony. His son, Danny Jr., was 8 years old and fascinated by everything alien. The boy approached a young Krell nervously, curiosity overcoming his uncertainty. "What is your name?" Danny Jr. asked. The young Krell responded through a translator. "I am Victor. What is yours?" "Danny, do you like science?" "I want to be an engineer like my dad. I like biology. I want to study how different species evolved on different worlds." The two children began talking about their interests, neither one thinking about war or deception, or the complicated history between their species. They were just kids meeting someone different and finding common ground. Their parents watched from a distance, hoping this simple interaction represented something larger. The second treaty signing ceremony was nothing like the first. This time, everyone involved knew exactly what they were agreeing to. The document was hundreds of pages long, filled with specific protocols and verification measures. There were no grand speeches about eternal peace or the end of conflict. Instead, there were sober acknowledgments of the work ahead and the vigilance required. Admiral Hayes attended in his dress uniform, one of his last official acts before retirement. He watched as the new generation of leaders signed the treaty, knowing this version had a real chance of lasting. Not because it relied on trust, but because it assumed trust needed to be earned and maintained through constant verification and communication. After the ceremony, General Patricia York found him standing alone looking out at the stars. She had also announced her retirement, her work finally complete. They stood together in comfortable silence, two old soldiers who had carried an impossible burden. "Do you think it will work this time?" York asked. Hayes took a long moment to answer. "I think we gave it the best chance possible. The first treaty was built on lies and hidden agendas. This one is built on honest assessment of capabilities and clear communication. That does not guarantee peace, but it makes war less likely. Sometimes that is all we can hope for." "What will you do now?" York asked. "Sleep," Hayes said with a slight smile. "For about a month. Then maybe write my memoirs. Someone should document what actually happened, even if most of it stays classified for another 50 years. York nodded. "History will judge us harshly, you know. The deception, the manipulation, using good people like Morgan without their knowledge. We will not be remembered kindly." "Probably not," Hayes agreed. 1 year after the Krell invasion failed, humanity hosted the first Galactic Security Summit. Representatives from 47 species gathered on Earth to discuss the new reality of interstellar relations. The location was symbolic. Earth had been targeted for destruction, yet here it stood stronger than ever, hosting the very conversations that would reshape how civilizations interacted across the stars. The summit took place in Geneva, in a conference center that had hosted peace negotiations for centuries. Outside, Protesters from a dozen species held signs with messages ranging from support to condemnation. Some praised humanity's strategic brilliance. Others called the deception unethical. A few demanded Hayes and York face charges for manipulating their own population. Democracy meant accepting that not everyone would approve of what had been done. Inside the main hall, species that had never fully trusted each other now discussed verification protocols and shared intelligence networks. The Krell situation had been a wake-up call. If it could happen once, it could happen again. Better to establish frameworks now before another crisis forced desperate measures. The conversations were difficult, touching on sovereignty and trust, but they were happening. That alone was progress. Dr. Lisa Morgan presented a paper on cultural integration and verification. She had spent the past year working on methods to maintain genuine cultural exchanges, while ensuring they could not be weaponized for intelligence gathering. Her approach balanced openness with appropriate security measures. Many species expressed interest in implementing her protocols. After her presentation, an elderly diplomat from a species called the Vren approached her. The Vren had been neutral during the human-Krell conflict, observers rather than participants. The diplomat's name was Korvan, and he had been in diplomacy for over a century. His species aged slowly and remembered much. "Your work is impressive, Dr. Morgan," Korvan said through his translator, "but I wonder if you have considered the deeper implications of what your government did. They did not just deceive the Krell. They deceived you and billions of humans who believed in the peace. How do your people trust their leaders now?" Morgan did not have an easy answer. "Trust has been damaged," she admitted. "Many people feel betrayed, but I think most understand that they are alive because of decisions they would not have wanted to know about at the time. It is an uncomfortable truth. We are still working through it as a society." Korvan nodded slowly. "Every civilization faces such moments. Times when leaders must choose between transparency and survival. Your species handled it better than most. But remember, the real test is not how you dealt with the crisis. It is how you handle the aftermath. Will this become your standard approach, or will it remain the exception?" "We are trying to make it the exception," Morgan said. "That is part of why these new protocols matter. If we can build real trust through verification, maybe we will never need that kind of deception again." The Vren diplomat smiled, an expression that translated across species. "That is the hope, yes. But hope must be paired with vigilance. Your Admiral Hayes understood that. I suspect your generation is learning it now." Captain Jake Morrison had been invited to present on military cooperation and joint operations. He stood before the assembled delegates in his dress uniform, feeling slightly out of place among the diplomats. But his experience working with former Krell enemies gave him a unique perspective that needed to be heard. "A year ago, I would have told you that working alongside Krell warriors was impossible," Morrison began. "They were the enemy. They had killed my friends. The idea of trusting them seemed like madness. But over the past months, I have learned something important. Individual soldiers are not their government's policies. Most Krell warriors were following orders just as I was. When their government changed and new orders came, they adapted. That does not excuse what was planned, but it shows that former enemies can become allies if the circumstances change." He pulled up a display showing joint patrol operations. "These missions work because we verify everything. We watch each other, not with suspicion, but with professional respect. We know our capabilities. We know our limitations. There are no secrets about what ships carry or what weapons are deployed. That transparency creates trust in a way that promises never could." A Krell delegate rose to speak. "Commander Morrison is correct. We were taught that humans were weak and sentimental. We were told they would be easy to defeat. The invasion proved how wrong those assumptions were. Now we work together not because we have forgotten the past, but because we have learned from it. Strength paired with honesty creates better partnerships than either strength or honesty alone." Back on the joint educational station, the program that had started with a handful of students had grown to over 300 children from multiple species. Danny Jr. was now 9 years old and had become close friends with Victar, the young Krell he met at the opening ceremony. They studied together, played together, and argued about science the way kids everywhere argued about their interests. Their teacher, a human named Helen Carter, watched them work on a group project about comparative biology. The ease with which they cooperated would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. These children did not carry the baggage of war. They knew the history, but it did not define their relationships. That was what peace actually looked like, she thought. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of genuine connection. Helen had been skeptical when she first took the teaching position. She had lost a brother in the earlier war and found it hard to imagine educating Krell children. But watching students from former enemy species work together had gradually changed her perspective. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance that the next generation deserved a chance at something better than endless conflict. One evening, Danny Jr. asked his father about the war. They sat together in their quarters while Danny Cross tried to explain complicated events to a 9-year-old. "How did we know the Krell were lying?" his son asked. "Did we have spies?" Danny Sr. chose his words carefully. "We had people who were very good at understanding patterns and information. They figured out that the Krell government was planning something bad. But here is the important part. Most Krell did not know about those plans. Your friend Victar's family had nothing to do with what the military was planning. That is why it is important to judge people as individuals, not just by what government they live under." His son thought about that. So the peace was fake, but now it is real? The first piece was based on lies, Danny explained. The second piece is based on everyone being honest about their capabilities and intentions. It is harder work, but it is more likely to last. Does that make sense? Danny Jr. nodded. I think so. It is like when you and Mom make me prove I did my homework instead of just trusting me. Verification. Danny Sr. smiled. Exactly like that. Trust is good, but checking makes the trust stronger. Lieutenant Sarah Blake had become a key figure in galactic verification protocols. Her analytical skills and fair treatment of both human and Krell interests had earned respect from multiple species. She received offers from 3 different governments to lead their intelligence divisions. She turned them all down, preferring to stay in the Joint Verification Office where she felt she could do the most good. One afternoon, she received a visit from Admiral Hayes. He had been retired for months but still kept track of the people he had brought into Project Watchdog. They met in a small cafe near her office, away from the formality of official settings. Hayes looked relaxed in civilian clothes. The weight of command finally lifted from his shoulders. "I wanted to thank you personally," Hayes said after they ordered coffee. "Your work during those critical months was exceptional. More importantly, what you are doing now is helping ensure we never have to use deception like that again." Sarah shook her head slightly. "I was just doing my job, sir. Analyzing patterns and reporting what I found. You did more than that. You saw things others missed and had the courage to report them even when your superiors dismissed your concerns. That kind of diligence is what saved us." He paused, then added, "I know carrying the secret was difficult. How are you handling it now that everything is public?" Sarah considered the question. "It is strange. Some people treat me like a hero for helping prevent the invasion. Others act like I was part of some conspiracy to deceive humanity. Both reactions feel wrong. I was just an analyst who found patterns and reported them. The hard decisions were made by people like you." Hayes smiled. "Welcome to the burden of command. Everyone wants simple stories with clear heroes and villains. Reality is messier. We did what we thought was necessary with imperfect information and no good options. History will judge whether we were right. All we can do is accept that judgment and continue doing our best." 5 years after the first treaty signing, 3 years after the failed invasion, humanity held a memorial service for all those lost in both wars. The ceremony took place on Earth, at a newly built monument that listed names from both the original conflict and those few who died in the failed Krell strike. Representatives from the Krell government attended, their presence controversial but important. Dr. Morgan gave the keynote address. She spoke about loss and learning, about the cost of both war and peace. "We remember those who